Most producers these days aren't audio engineers, and yet they still need release-ready masters. In this video, I'm going to show you how to master if you're not a mastering engineer. We're going to use a very minimal set of cutting-edge modern tools that's very powerful. And I'm going to show you simple step-by-step workflows that'll allow you to get super professional results in minutes. Rather than talking a lot about theory, we're going to get hands-on in this session with lots of real-world audio examples. Let's go. Mastering is the final 10% sheen. It's the translation check and quality assurance. You're the final set of ears in the process before this song goes out into the world. Now, you might find yourself in one of two broad categories. Maybe it's your own song that you're mastering, we'll call that self-mastering, or maybe you're mastering for a client. If you're self-mastering, I highly suggest that you take 2 to 3 days off between finishing the mix and engaging with the mastering process, just to give your ears a bit of a chance to reset and regain as much objectivity as possible. If you're mastering for a client, you can dig right in. In terms of how creative you get, if you're self-mastering, you can be a bit more explorative. You're the one who is designing the creative vision for the song, but if you're mastering for a client, then you're definitely going to need to respect the existing mix, and you're going to want to try and sweeten what's there versus redesign it. Either way, you're going to want to engage what we'll call the mastering mindset, and I'll equip you with a few guiding principles. The first is that less is more. Mastering is about small moves, it's light touch. And if you keep your processing simplistic and straightforward, the less processing, the better. Especially when you're new to this, it'll help prevent you from making mistakes. The second is that you are going to want to engage an objective listening mode. So you're going to be suspending any personal opinions, preferences, and judgment about the music, and you're just going to take what's there and help it sound its best. And finally, during the process, you're going to be doing a lot of very careful A/B comparisons to be able to ensure that your work is aligning with any established targets, like references. Now, I promised you a lot of audio examples, so let's get right into one. I'm going to A/B a raw mix versus the mastered version at the same loudness level. Let's check it out.
Waiting for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's ours to save me, a rock to the music that you name me. We'll all fly away, all namaste. We'll all come back on the day when everything's low.
Mastering requires careful listening and the ability to hear all the details in the music. You don't need to have a world-class studio, but you do need accuracy. So if you're not in an acoustically treated room with monitoring with enough bass extension to go down to 25 hertz or so, then my suggestion would be to use headphones. My preferred headphones are the Odyssey MM500s, which were tuned by Manny Marroquin, and they have incredibly deep bass extension, a very flat frequency response, and they're amazing for engineering. I also want to say that YouTube has a feature called Stable Volume in the browser, and I suggest that you turn that off. You can find it down in the settings, and what it is intended to do is add extra dynamic range compression to dialogue in YouTube videos for people that haven't compressed their audio properly. But I've heard reports from users that it also seems to be affecting music sometimes, and because the changes that we're talking about in mastering regarding dynamics can be fairly subtle, you'll definitely want to turn that off. Before we dive into processing, we're going to check the mix file and spool up our DAW session. So I do this in iZotope RX Audio Editor using the Waveform Stats module. It gives me a lot of information about the file. But if you don't have RX, you can just as easily do this in your DAW or even by inspecting the file in your operating system. You'll want to confirm that you're working with a minimum 24-bit depth file in lossless WAV or AIFF. And you'll want to make sure that your minimum sample rate is 44.1 for music, or if you're working with a file that'll end up on video, 48 kilohertz is the native sample rate. You want to inspect it to make sure that there's no clipping. This can be a little bit hard to tell if the file has been normalized, so I usually ask my clients for a non-normalized file that has just a couple dB at least of headroom between the peaks and 0 dB FS. And then you'll also want to check the intro and the outro just to make sure there's a little bit of space before the first beat, and then also for all of the decays to be able to drop all the way down to 0 and nothing's been truncated. You want to set your DAW to the same sample rate as the file, and then you're good to go. You only get one chance for a first listen, so I'm really precious about this process. I know that the first time I hear it, I'm going to be the most objective and likely to catch things. Here's my process. I'll spool up the session in a DAW with no processing and no meters. I don't want any visual distractions whatsoever. Then I sit on my hands, literally, and close my eyes. Then I listen all the way through from top to bottom, and I'm paying careful attention to a specific set of things. I'm listening for tonal balance. I'm listening to dynamics, both microdynamics like drums and quick transients, as well as macrodynamics, such as how the energy level of a drop sounds relative to a buildup or a verse into a chorus. I'm checking out the level of density, gel, and containment in the mix. How thick is that mix? And also the clarity of key elements, especially vocals, where there's a message being delivered through the lyrics, but also in lead instruments, melody synths, things like that. I'm listening to how wide the overall piece sounds, as well as the general vibe and fit with the intended genre. Now, I'm also listening for audio repair issues. So as I go through, I'm listening for weird export artifacts, clicks, mouth noises, hums, resonances, and frequency buildups. And as soon as I'm done, I open up a notes file and do a brain dump. I write down everything that I've heard, and that becomes my to-do list for the mastering session. Let's check this out with a real-world example. I've got a song spooled up called Everything's Glowing, which is an original by myself and Angus Wilson. It's coming up for release on my label, and this is a remix by Sam Winter. All the artists' links are below if you want to check them out.
We're all coming and going on this highway, finally open to try it, and we're flying away. For a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's ours to say me, a rock to the music that you name me. We'll all fly away, all namaste. We'll all come back on the day when everything's...
I'd love to hear from you in the comments below what you thought on first listen. What stood out to you? Here's my list. Tonal balance-wise, I felt like the track was a bit bass light. On the top end, I felt like it was on the bright side. This is a song that will be listened to at high SBLs, and things that are above 10K is earbleed territory, so I usually dial that back a bit. In terms of dynamics, lots of dynamics. Too much dynamics. There's only so much crest factor that you need for a song to sound punchy. If you're unfamiliar with that term, crest factor is the difference between the peak level and the RMS level, and it gives you an idea of your microdynamics in the track. I felt like the drums sounded a little bit pokey and on top of everything else. Density and containment-wise, I felt like the mix was a little bit thin and could be beefed up, and that'll definitely happen in mastering. And then in terms of general energy flow, I felt like when the drop hits, it can smack with a bit more aggression. It's good to consider where this song will end up in terms of destinations. Is this going to be a streaming-only master? Will it wind up in a DJ set played losslessly? Is it going to be part of an album or an EP? Will it be part of an existing catalog, like a label or an artist's body of work? All of those things matter in terms of any targets or requirements. With streaming sites, they have published loudness normalized playback targets. But don't confuse those with mastering targets. They are not mastering targets. I don't even look at loudness until much later in the mastering process. And in fact, I master without considering loudness for the sound, and then only in the finalization process do I start looking at meters. Next, you're going to choose a reference track, and this is critically important for both beginners and professionals alike, so don't skip it. The purpose of the reference track is to provide you with an A-B comparison point to be able to guide all of your mastering decisions. It'll help you to be more objective as you go through the mastering process. How do you choose a reference track? Well, you want to find something that is of the same style or genre, ideally tempo and key, and the same type of instrumentation as your mix. So if your mix has a lead vocal, then it would be great to find another reference that has a lead vocal instead of an instrumental, because that won't really be an apples to apples comparison. So now let's take a look inside of Ozone 12 to see how to import and set up a reference track. So you come down to the reference area, click that. From here, you can load your file. I've already gotten one pre-selected that's pretty close to the mix file that we're working with. Once it loads, you'll see all of these different sections that you can click on. And this is super handy because what it's done is it's isolated intros, drops, build-ups, chorus, all of those types of things. So you can just click through and find a heavy section. And I've gotten a heavy section of our mix spooled up. I typically go to the loudest, fullest section of the song when I begin the referencing process. And in this case, it'll be in the drop where the lead vocal is in, because I want to hear that lead element. So I'm going to select a equivalent section of the reference. Now, the reference being fully mastered is going to be much, much louder. So the first thing I'll do is use this gain slider to turn it way, way down. Next, what you're going to want to do is come and click on the I/O, and you can click this option to replace your input meter with the reference. And this is going to help us with level matching. Next, Ozone defaults to RMS and peak, but I actually find it a little bit more useful for level matching to use short-term LUFS. So I'm going to do that. Now pay attention as I initiate playback. The meter on the left is going to be the level of the reference track. The meter on the right is going to be the level of our mix. And I'm going to go through the matching process now.
Looking for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. Too little and too late. We'll all fly away, all namaste. We'll all come back on the
Awesome. So they're roughly matched now, and that's good enough for us to start. I want to let you know about a fantastic video on the iZotope channel that goes deeper into the referencing process and shows you more about how to use this referencing area inside of Ozone. I'll drop a link below in the video description so you can check that out. Now for the fun part, when we get to begin applying processing. Earlier, I promised that I was going to keep this workflow simple, focusing on modern cutting-edge tools that allow us to work smarter, not harder. So in the spirit of that, we're going to click over to the Master Assistant in Ozone 12. For some time now, we've had this one-click workflow, but now we have a custom workflow that really appeals to both professionals and beginners because it gives you a lot of tweakability. We begin over on the left by choosing a target genre. I have some favorites saved. We're going to choose future bass. Then over on the right, we have the ability to customize the processing chains. I'm going to disable modules that are easier to make mistakes with when you're a beginner, and I'll leave us with a simplified processing chain of the more basic building blocks. So we're going to disable master rebalance, the clarity, and stabilizer modules. And we're going to leave ourselves with, EQ, compression via impact, imager, dynamic EQ. Then over on the right, we can customize the loudness section. And I mentioned earlier how it's good to keep your destination in mind when you're setting goals and parameters for your master. Well, this song is going to be rendered as a lossless.wav intended for play in a DJ set. So I'm not concerned about streaming playback at all here. So as a result, I don't need to leave much of a margin. So all the way up to negative 0.1 is fine because there doesn't need to be space for lossy compression noise. I'm also not going to worry about using true peak limiting, and we'll leave the maximizer on. And then intensity, you can go from subtle over to what they would call transformative. I like to leave this right dead up the center at the beginning. And then we need to be able to select a target loudness. Like I said earlier, I'm not into targeting a particular level of loudness. I master based on the sound that the chain generates, the level of density or containment that the mastering process adds. So I'm going to leave this at default. -9 is not particularly loud for this genre, and we can tweak it later. And then the final step we need to do is go and choose an analysis time. So I've got a heavy section of the drop setup where the vocal's in. It's 8 bars long. I can click here to sync that, and I can choose 8 bars. Then we just start the assistant and play those 8 bars and let it do its magic. With the analysis complete, this is the view that we now see, which is a very simplistic view where you can tweak things in broad strokes. But now what I recommend doing is flipping out of the assistant view and back into the detailed view so you can see all the individual modules as well as the processing choices that the assistant has made. and this is where we begin to tweak things. Just before we listen to the processed version, I highly recommend that you turn gain match on. So what gain match is going to do is avoid fooling your ears with loudness and avoid big jumps in loudness in the mastering process by matching the process signal with the level of the unmastered mix. So with this on, we're going to be able to A/B back and forth at equal loudness comparisons. Let's have a listen to the processed signal.
Looking for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's honest to say me, a rock to the music that you name me. Well, shadows in my face. We all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say.
I like to handle tonal balance first and leave loudness and dynamics until later in the process. So let's go ahead and deactivate everything except the very first EQ. And let's just focus on the tonal balance shaping. Do you remember in my first impressions, I had commented that the mix felt a little bit bright and a little bit bass light to me? Well, let's go through and correct for that. I'm going to take this shelf, and instead of actually having the high shelf above 10K be 1 dB boosted, I'm going to have it be 1 dB attenuated. Same thing on the bottom end. I'm going to take this shelf that the assistant has put in, and instead of having it attenuate, I'm going to set this to 100 and have this boost by 1 dB. Okay? Let's have a listen.
Looking for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's honest to say me.
Okay, I'm going to take this subtractive bell. I'm going to take that out. I like that. This, if we want to hear what the processing is doing in a particular region, we can use the solo function right here. Yeah, that's vocal fundamental territory. I like that. I'm going to leave that in. But I think I like what the mid scooping and accentuation is doing in general, but I think maybe it's just a little bit too much. So I love the global amount slider here. This lets you take your processing decisions and either overemphasize them or rein them in a little bit. Keeping with our mastering mindset principle of less is more, I oftentimes like to take the processing and just dial it back to see if I like the less processed signal better. So let's try that out.
Looking for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's honest to say me, a rock to the music that you name me. We'll all fly away, all namaste. We'll all come back on the day when everything.
And now's when I'm going to begin to engage some metering. So what we can do is we can click on the I/O section up here, and you can see that there's this option to show the reference spectrum. So we are going to see the reference spectrum overlaid, which can help us in EQing decisions. However, I like to customize my spectrum. So we can go up to our settings, we can click on spectrum, and rather than having it be spectrum type linear, which is very detailed to look at, I like to go down to the critical bands. And then we can take the average time, and instead of having it dance around very, very quickly, we can have the averaging time be 10 seconds or maybe even infinite. So this is going to show us in general broad terms in an easier way to see. And this is my personal preference. You can follow this or not, but this is my process. You can take a look at how this differs from how it appeared originally.
Looking for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I've gotta say. Too little and too late. Shadows in my face.
Yeah, so I feel that that processing we've applied aligns more closely with the reference, especially when we back off the amount to less than 100. Now, that was the static EQ. There's also a dynamic EQ. The purpose of a dynamic EQ is to deal with intermittent issues, frequency buildups, resonances, sibilants, or things that you want to add hyper-targeted compression to. And you can see that it has added 3 separate nodes. Let's have a listen to what it's doing.
Looking for people in the mix that night. more that I gotta say. It's always the same music that you name me.
In general, I like this node because it's added a little bit of control right in that critical area where the human ear is the most sensitive. I find with vocal material, oftentimes I'm looking for a little bit of control around the 2K region because that is oftentimes what feels harsh to us. So I'm actually going to experiment with moving this bell to 2K. And the 4K bell up here is actually a harmonic of 2K, so these two are related to each other.
Waiting for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. It's always the same, a rock to the music.
Yeah, I like that a little bit better. And then this high shelf up here is just helping to control a bit of the harshness that's happening in the very top end from the snare hitting, and I like that control as well. So this is pretty much how I'd settle on shaping the tonal balance of the song. Let's move on. The impact module is fantastic for managing microdynamics in your master, and in many cases I prefer it to more traditional approaches like compression. If we take a look at what's happening, we can see that it has globally dropped the impact of all of the transients across all of the bands. And this agrees with my observation earlier where I said that I felt the transients were sticking out, they were pokey, they were sitting on top of the mix, and that as a result, the entire mix felt like it was lacking a bit of density. I agree with what it's done here. If you're going to make adjustments to this, rather than fussing with the individual bands, as a beginner, I would recommend using this link feature. You can drag them up and down. They maintain their relationships to each other, but they just give you a simplistic more or less control. Okay, so let's start by turning this off. Let's listen against the original mix and the reference and see if we like the processing.
Waiting for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I gotta say. All namaste, we'll all come back on the day when everything.
Yeah, you can hear that the reference actually has quite a bit more suppressed transients. It's a bit more compressed and smooth. If I want to adjust the amount of the processing, I also have this global amount slider up here. Let's play with that against the reference.
Waiting for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I gotta say. It's always the same, a rock to the music that you name me. We'll all fly away, all namaste, we'll all come back on the day when everything's attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I gotta say.
I like it turned up a bit. Note that this auto button here is applying gain compensation for the level loss from dropping the transients. So it's allowing us to maintain perceived loudness through the process. Now it's time for the big guns. We're going to go over to the maximizer. The maximizer is the stage where everything gets loud. So we're going to leave gain match on and we'll listen and A/B turning the maximizer on and off.
Waiting for people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute, there's a little bit more that I gotta say. It's always the same, a rock to the music that you name me. We'll all fly away, all namaste, we'll all come back on the day when
So what's going on inside the maximizer? First of all, what makes a maximizer and not a limiter? It's that it has additional processing that increases the perceived loudness that isn't just the limiting stage. So in Ozone, we have these other aspects, upwards compress, soft clip, that are additional ways of manipulating the dynamics and loudness of the song. The most significant aspect of what's happening in the limiting stage is what it's touching. And that's where the delta function really comes in handy. If we turn this on, we're going to hear what the limiter is acting on. So let's have a listen to that. Now, what I'm listening for here when I monitor this is how much bass it's grabbing, how much of the drum transients are being affected, and also how much it's processing the lead vocal. And in general, I find that it's just grabbing a little bit too much of the lead vocal for my liking. When you're new to using Maximizer, I would actually suggest that you stick with IRC3, IRC3 is a very advanced algorithm that minimizes the amount of distortion, but it's a wide band, more simple algorithm. It's a single band. When you get into IRC4, you actually have a tonal shaping stage prior to the limiter that can adjust the tonal balance. That can be a great thing, but it can also change the tonal balance that we've carefully set earlier in the process. Same thing with IRC5. The new IRC5 limits different frequency ranges independently from each other. So to keep things simple, we're going to go to IRC3 balanced. Let's have another listen. So I like that because we're hearing less of the vocal in there, and we're hearing a bit more of the drums, which is really what I want to be containing here. So I like that. Let's move on to upwards compress and soft clip. Those are both features that I want to use here. Upwards compress, let's turn it off, and let's listen to what happens when it pops in.
For people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute. There's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's ours to say me, a rock to the...
Yeah, I like the interplay of the body or the RMS of the signal coming up relative to the drums. And it just helps the whole mix to gel together and get a sense of density without the limiter having to do all the work from the top down on the peaks. Now, soft clip. Soft clipping is definitely an integral part of a lot of electronic genres, including this one. And what it's going to do is take some level off of those pokey transients, but in a different way to how the limiter is working. The limiter's setup is to avoid distortion at all costs. It's not acting fast enough to be able to do that. It's trying to be smooth. What the soft clipper is going to do is it's going to round off and wave shape those transients in a way that drops the peak level a little bit, good for the limiter. And it is going to compensate for that level loss, which you might think reduces punch, with a little burst of distortion. And even though the level's coming down, the amplitude of the drums, there's a compensatory effect where they sound as loud or sometimes even louder by the addition of those beautiful, juicy harmonics. So we're going to turn this on, and we'll choose the most mild form of this, which is low. And it's going to allow the signal to be not touched, and then right as it gets close to the clip point, it's going to begin rounding it off. Let's play with this.
For people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute. There's a little bit more that I've gotta say.
Now we're going to use the delta signal again, and I want you to listen to what happens to what the limiter's touching when I activate soft clip. Do you hear how all of a sudden the amount of signal that the limiter's touching decreases? And that's because soft clipping, by virtue of rounding off the transients and absorbing some peak level, it's taking things out of the path of the limiter threshold. So they function really well together in tandem, kind of like friends, both sharing the load and doing parts of the process. If you've really been paying attention, you'll notice that there's one module that we haven't activated yet, and that's the imager. I typically will leave this off until the end because the action of the maximizer can affect our perception of the sense of width and spaciousness in the song. So let's go ahead and tweak that now. We'll activate it here, and you can see that the Master Assistant has kind of done this Christmas tree thing. In general, the approach with the imager is to focus the bottom band, not entirely to mono, but just to bring it in and give it a solid foundation. Then with the other bands, it depends highly on the program material and on the reference that you're using. Let's go ahead and check out the processing and see if we like it.
For people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute. There's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's ours to say me, a rock to the music that you name me. We'll all fly away, all namaste. We'll all come back on the day when everything...
Now we're going to use the mono feature in Ozone, and you want to listen for anything that reduces in level or starts to disappear, especially things that are foundational to the mix, such as kick, snare, bass, lead vocal, lead synths, things like that.
For people in the mix that night, and we all stayed on till the light of day. But give me your attention for a minute. There's a little bit more that I've gotta say. It's ours to all night.
Yep. I think that I'll rein in that low mid band just a bit. Not quite as extreme. Note that there is an amount slider up here that is at 50%, so it's not actually doing the full adjustment that you can see based on the sliders. That has been reined in. And I also want you to pay attention to this recover sides feature. As you begin to narrow bands, there can be level loss. And so this is helping to retain the level of any side content that has been removed. Now that we've got this one in the pocket, it's time to export our final file. So we've got the export dialog from Live open here. The first thing we're going to say is keep the bit depth at 24. We've been working at 24 this entire time. We're not changing it. There's no need to export at 32. That's just wasting file size. So we're going to keep it at 24. And if we're not dropping the bit depth, then there's no reason to dither. Dither will just add an unnecessary increase in the noise floor of the file. And honestly, if I was going to dither, I would do it over in Ozone anyways, because it has best-in-class processing. But if you're not reducing the bit depth, say from 24 to 16, there's no reason to dither. Sample rate. The source file here was at 44.1 kilohertz, and normally I'd leave it at that all through the whole process and export. But in this case, I've been recording a video for YouTube where the native sample rate is 48, so I'm going to leave it there. Make sure when you export, you have enough room at the beginning and end of your file for maybe a little split second before the first beat drops, and for the decays to fully go without them truncating, and make sure that you're looping up the entire song. Obviously that goes without saying, and then run your export. Once you're done, I like to re-import the export back into the DAW, and I like to apply tiny little fades. Those can be done by ear. They can depend on the song, but I prefer to do the fades on the final file and then render it again. So now that you've got your file exported, let's talk about how to do QA. Quality assurance. The first thing I do is I'll fire it up again in the studio, give it a good listen, make sure that the export was clean and nothing glitched. Then you're going to want to take it and do translation checks. I'm going to listen in a variety of other environments and systems and see if anything jumps out to me. My go-to environments are listening on headphones, including small AirPod-style headphones, Bluetooth speakers, in my car, and any other environments that I think are relevant. Now, if I notice something pop up, if it's only in one of those environments, I might overlook it, but if it's in two or more, if it's a consistent issue, then I'm going to want to come back into the studio, see if I can hear that issue, and definitely consider it as something that I'm going to want to address. There's some key principles I want you to keep in mind as you move forwards and try this out for yourselves. Start with a really simple chain, don't get fancy, and then lean on that Master Assistant custom workflow to get you reliably in the ballpark. Once that's established and you've got a good baseline, you can optimize from there and get a little bit more creative. But remember, mastering is about small moves and light touch. So err on the side of less processing if you're unsure. You have access to the same tools that the pros use. So dive in, practice, and try your hand at mastering. There's a link right below this video to grab a trial version of Ozone 12. Reach out to me in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you thought about this video, which tips stood out to you. And as you begin to master music, let me know how it goes. I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.